talking this week about hybrid working. So quick reminder that we now have these, sorry, 1 second, there we go, that we now have our Tuesday pod mail, which has the pod sheet. And for those of you who are new, this is what a pod sheet looks like, or if you've not used one yet, these are our pod sheets. The idea of these pod sheets is they are a summary of the podcast that you can come back to. They have things like, let's just scroll in. They have coach yourself questions. Okay, you can't see that in yellow. You have coach yourself questions, some ideas for action. There's some recommended resources there for you. Actually, you can see some of Thomas's articles there. So quite useful to download. You can either get those through signing up to Podmail, or you can just get them on the website. And then there's also things like the pod notes, which are a very kind of pithy summary with kind of quotes, maybe 3 actions, something like that. So they are much shorter. One of the things that we haven't added to Podmail yet, but is coming, albeit it's a good job Helen's not here this morning, because she'll be like, let's just stick with what we've got for a bit. But we are going to each week also create a mini playlist around the theme or the topic. So for example, and I've just done this here, if this week is about hybrid, what are 2 or 3 other episodes that might be relevant or useful if you want to dig a bit deeper into that topic? So it's a bit like, I guess, the Amazon or Netflix algorithm, but out of Helen and I's head in terms of what else might be helpful. So 3 episodes that I've just picked out for you. Number 24 was about flexible working. So a very early podcast that we did all about flexible working. And then I picked out number 151, which is my interview with Amy Edmondson on psychological safety. I would say if you're going to only choose one of the podcasts to listen to, or one of the person's work to read in relation to hybrid working, Amy Edmondson is probably where I would start, because I do think psychological safety and creating a hybrid world of work go hand in hand, the more I think about it. And then we've also got Bill Burnett and Dave Evans talking about designing your work life. That's probably more about you personally, thinking about how you want your work to work, what you want that to look like. Whereas Amy Edmondson's work is more about leadership and management and creating environments for everybody where we can all thrive. So just a reminder, those things succeed, those things exist. And at some point, we'll try and make sure that those go in the pod mail on Tuesday as well. So I thought we would start by getting a bit of feedback from all of you about how we're feeling about hybrid generally. So we're going to use the annotation for this. If this is your first session, well, I didn't even say hello if it is your first session, but thank you for joining. And just in case you need a quick reminder to use the annotation, it's just view options, annotate, stamp, and then star. I know Sarah will be handily putting that in the chat as we speak. Usually you go to the top of your screen. If you're on your phone, it won't work, but don't panic. This is just a bit of fun to get us started on this Thursday morning. So I'd love to know, first of all, how are you feeling about this idea of hybrid work generally? And we're going to ask you some quite binary questions to get you started. Are you feeling excited, enthusiastic, or are you more kind of in the kind of anxiety, I'm a bit anxious about what this is going to mean for me and for my work? So if you have to kind of pick a side, pick a team, where are we at the moment, excited or anxious? Let's see whether we reflect how people seem to be feeling generally or as a group. At the moment, it feels like we might be slightly more upbeat and positive, which doesn't surprise me. Sophia's got another vote for excited there. So most of us are feeling more excited than we are anxious, but definitely some people feeling a little bit more anxious. What's quite interesting generally is I was reading some of the work by Herminia Rabara the other day. She's a professor at London Business School. And one of the things that she talks about is how hard we find what I would describe as in-between moments. So almost when a change hasn't quite happened, but we know it's coming, but we're not sure what it's going to look like. That kind of, I think it's described, it's a new word for me. I hope I'm saying it right. It's like liminality, I think. You can let me know if I'm saying that. Victoria's written the same word that I just said. I may or may not have pronounced it right, but essentially it's when you're betwixt and between. You're sort of, you know you're moving from where you are, but you've not quite got to where you're going. And that's really hard, because that's probably the highest level of ambiguity that we experience. Just to put this into context for you, I feel a bit like this at the moment because my little boy is about to start school. So he's finishing nursery tomorrow and he starts school in a couple of weeks. And we've sort of got this in-between time of all of our childcare is changing. I'm not sure what we're going to be doing for Amazing If, where I'm going to be spending most of my time. And I think, and that's making me definitely feel a bit more on edge because I just don't quite have that certainty yet. So though I'm someone who loves variety and I like change, I think I'm probably more over here as well, both personally and a little bit professionally too. But good to see lots of you feeling perhaps a little bit more upbeat, which is great. Next question for you. Do you feel when you're thinking about hybrid work, and I think this will obviously depend on where you work and the sort of job that you are doing, do you feel involved and that you are kind of part of the process of designing how hybrid work could work? Do you feel that you're being listened to, that you are kind of part of that process? Or do you feel you're going to be told what that's going to look like for you? So I suppose how involved versus told are we feeling in terms of hybrid work? And told is not necessarily a bad thing. For those of you who listen to the podcast, we'll come back to Thomas's point about structure. So told doesn't necessarily mean wrong. One extra vote for told there, which I'll put in here for you. So generally, this is usually better. But we'll come back to, like I said, we'll come back to this point about how structure can actually be quite supportive. Brilliant, but encouraging to feel that we are all being, lots of us are being involved in what that might look like. And then the last one I just wanted to ask you about is this idea of whether, do you get concerned that being present, actually I'm going to do it the other way around because otherwise it's going to be confusing. 1 second. I'm going to do, oh no, yeah, that is right. Present equals progression. So do you feel concerned that almost the amount that you physically show up to a physical environment, that those people are going to progress further, faster, that's going to matter, that's going to be a thing to worry about? Or do you feel like outputs or outcomes, however you want to describe it, essentially the work that you deliver, that is going to be what will help you progress? So anybody kind of more concerned over here about, which is one of the points that Thomas did talk about on the podcast, that, you know, yes, you might have some options about where you work, but if you are someone who maybe chooses to work at home more often than not, that could actually impact your ability to progress, whatever progression looks like for you. Not necessarily talking about promotion, but just generally opportunities coming your way, projects coming your way. Another vote from Sophia there. Yeah, that's a good point, Ellen. So you know, there might, a few people have actually made this point, which I think is really empathetic. So there might be a difference between how you feel and how other people feel. So that's really interesting, kind of having that walking in other people's shoes of thinking you might feel quite confident over here, but recognize that this is a challenge for lots of people. This is probably the one that we've been most split on so far. Some good questions and good insights to maybe ask of both yourself, but also the people that you work with. 3 insights that I particularly took listening to Helen's conversation with Thomas yesterday. The first one that really struck me was this idea of we are going to need to be really flexible about what this hybrid world looks like and how it all fits together, versus having a fixed view of going, this is the North Star, this is exactly where we're aiming, and it's a very kind of fixed destination. It's sort of I suppose the squiggly approach to hybrid is knowing that we need to experiment, we need to be flexible, we need to learn along the way. And if I think about everything I have read and listened to on hybrid, that's probably the #1 insight that I have heard repeatedly. This idea of don't try to solve, make sure you've got a kind of more of an evolving mindset, that you've got to start somewhere, but be really clear about, well, we're experimenting, we need to make sure we're listening. We'll come back to this listening point. We're going to keep adapting, keep understanding what seems to work. And that's hard for organizations, and that's hard for leaders, because we are so used to trying to create clarity for people. And this essentially is sitting with more uncertainty, with allowing some of that in-betweenness that perhaps we feel now to continue. Probably not quite as much as maybe we feel in the here and now, or maybe certainly how much I feel in the here and now, but knowing that you're not going to get to a fixed point. And actually, if you read that McKinsey article that I shared, one of the things that they really talk about is this is not a kind of one-hit wonder. This is like a new operating model. This is something that's going to take time over years. Whereas at the moment, there's quite a lot of focus, I think, on September, as if suddenly in September, all of this stuff is going to magically happen. And I don't think that will be the reality. So I think that's the kind of a really interesting point to just think about, that for ourselves and for people around us, we might be sitting with some of this uncertainty for longer than we anticipate. Maybe people are thinking there's going to be a point where this will all be resolved. And I suspect it won't be as clear-cut or as straightforward as that. The other thing I did find interesting that Thomas was talking about, and I personally don't necessarily, this doesn't resonate with me, but I'll be really interested to see what you think about this in the chat. He talked about that people do like some element of structure, some element of being told, okay, the way that we are going to work this is we want you to be in the office 2 days of the week, and then you can 3 days to figure out for yourselves. And you need to be in the office to do X, Y, Z. So essentially, it's the freedom within a framework point that Jim Collins often makes, that I refer to quite a lot, that we need framework, we need structures as humans, because we like that. It gives us more knowns. My concern with that is sometimes that then means it takes away people's freedom and autonomy to kind of decide what that framework should look like for them. And it takes away some of that flexibility, perhaps. And what happens if for one person, 4 days a week at home works so much better, and for someone else, 2 days a week works much better? And you can see lots of organizations now are trying to give people some structure, because people do like that structure. Thomas in the podcast, he talked about dress codes, didn't he? And saying that people don't like just being told to just dress for your day. I once had a boss who said, that's what our dress code policy should be. And I always really liked that. Just dress for your day, trust people to be adults, to figure it out for themselves. Thomas would probably argue that's not enough. You've got to be more explicit and more structured than that. Otherwise, you're making people work too hard. Let's see what James has got to say. Yeah, I agree. I think I'm more in and it might be idealistic, I'm more in well, how do we do this in a really kind of more personal way? And it does mean treating everybody kind of adult to adult. And perhaps it does mean having a bit less structure, which some people might find quite unusual. But can we give people that opportunity for personalization? And it's interesting, isn't it? Because some people might want more structure. I was talking to my partner a bit about this yesterday. He's an accountant, and you can tell he would quite like that structure. Whereas I'm somebody who, one of my values is variety. So probably not a surprise that I go, oh, this is a bit less interesting for me. This is much more interesting. Back to this point about being really personalized. So quite an interesting point. And then the last point is just around the role of managers. This is where I think psychological safety is so important. So, and when I say managers, I really mean leaders, anyone who is in a position to influence others. So if we think about it that way, so who are the influential individuals in your organization? I think the shadow that they cast and the behaviors that they role model will be really important over the next 6 to 12 months. Because even if an organization is saying, oh, people can work however they want, but you've got a manager who is in the office 4 days a week, back to this point about presenteeism and progression, it's quite hard. And I think it takes a lot of confidence for somebody to then choose to say, well, my manager's in 4 days a week, but I'm going to go into the office 1 day a week. And so I wonder how that will work. And I think thinking about from a manager and a leader perspective, how that community think about hybrid work, I think is going to be really critical, because to me, this is a difference between what organizations say and then what they do. And we look to our leaders and our managers to what they do as, well, they're the people who are behaving in the way that is how we do things around here. So I think just not underestimating the impact of managers and leaders. And I've worked with leaders who are brilliant, who've said, well, just because this is what I do, it's absolutely not what I expect other people to do. But my point back to them, sometimes my challenge back to them is, and that's fine, but you can say that, but people believe a lot more the actions that you take than the words that you say. So that would always be my kind of challenge, worth thinking about. So I think with hybrid work, there's two things that are really interesting. There's kind of the where, and lots of people focus on the where, and then there's the how of hybrid work, which I suspect is ultimately the more interesting point. But I thought we'd do where quickly, and then I thought we'd spend a bit of time on the how. So where are you spending your time? And I think it's interesting to perhaps do a visual view of where you're spending your time at the moment and what your ideal would look like. But start with your ideal. Let's start with what you would like this to look like. So for example, for me, just to show this quickly, I think my ideal is to probably have 60% of my time kind of, I say at home, but sort of somewhere local to where I live, essentially. That could be in coffee shops, that could be in my spare bedroom as I am now. Sometimes that's in my dining room, where you'll sometimes see me doing Pod Plus as well. I really like variety. So I don't see this as working at home. I see this as kind of working near home or around my local area. Maybe that's in a co-working space. I actually went to look at a co-working space this week, because bearing in mind I like to be in different places, I was thinking now might be the time where I sort of feel confident enough to start kind of mixing it up a little bit. And then for me, I'd like to spend 40% of my time somewhere different. And again, I'm as flexible as thinking that could be in other organisations, that might be in London having meetings, that might be going up to Manchester for a couple of days, that could be doing anything, but essentially it means that I'm somewhere different. I've kind of gone to somewhere different, but I might be doing, in terms of what I'm spending my time on, it would look and feel really different. If I think visually how my time is spent at the moment, it probably looks something like this. I'm probably about 90%, and obviously this is because we're not in hybrid world yet, we've been in pandemic world. 90% of my time I'm pretty much kind of at home, and just starting to spend probably about 10% of my time somewhere else, and I can start to see that increasing. But it's quite useful to just have this perspective for yourself on what your reality is right now, knowing that you're probably not in a reality that you designed for yourself. Probably wasn't loads of choice. Maybe for some of you there is, maybe you were already pre-pandemic working in the way that you wanted to, but for lots of us, we didn't actively take the decision or kind of control the reality of how we are working right now. And I think it is really easy to then kind of fall into kind of what happens next. So actually just having this in mind in terms of the where, I think is a really helpful thing as well to keep coming back to. So I think between now and Christmas, I'm going to just look back at the end of every month and just think, in terms of my where, roughly if I was to think about percentages, where do I feel like I'm spending my time, and does that feel right for me? Appreciating that I'm in a fortunate position where I'm relatively in control of how I spend my time, but not always. We do lots of work with clients, so that might start to mean that I'm spending 60% of my time out and about. And again, I would probably want to be spending a bit more time at home. So just thinking about that for yourself. So what I thought we would do is just share now in chat, thinking about what does your ideal where, so this is really focusing on the where, look like, and how does that compare to your reality? So obviously not expecting you to all do your circles in chat, because that would be very difficult, but just let me know any insights that you've got in terms of where you are now versus where you would like to be. Let me know, are you someone who wants to be spending loads more time in the office? Have you been really missing collaborating with people in person? I met someone at this co-working space this week who was so desperate for people. You could tell he was really extrovert, and he was like, I need more people in my life. Are you someone who actually thinks the balance that maybe you've discovered accidentally through kind of the forced circumstances of the last year or so, are you going to try and maintain that? So are you how do I maintain how I'm working right now? Or you got some sort of radical redesign in mind that you would really like to achieve? So just let me know any initial insights in chat that you've got, having kind of started to maybe visualize and think about this for yourself. And then I'm just going to give you kind of 3 provocations to take away today. Just give everyone a second to do that. Not near your reality yet, Gary, yeah. A lot of time at home. Ideal would, so Sue's saying 100% home now, primarily would like to stay home, but a bit of time in the office. What have we got? Poppy talking about she works in a county council, different cultures. That's interesting. Culture within cultures within an organisation. Steve saying worked at home for 8 years, or already absolutely nailing it from the sounds of it. Yeah, so but would like to be at other offices some of the time, but your ideal is not too far away from where you are right now, but maybe an opportunity to mix it up a bit more. Frankie saying, yeah, been in the office 2 or 3 days and really, really enjoyed that. Rebecca, great, you've got a great balance already. Love spending time with your husband and dog. Ah, how nice for them, Victoria. And that's really interesting insight. You're saying there you've never been more accessible. So sometimes we make these assumptions, don't we? Being at home means we are less accessible, less available, but actually you found the opposite. Being able to test some of those assumptions. There's some good research. I'm sure it was Bruce Daisley who shared it in his newsletter, which is excellent. If you don't subscribe to that, I think it's only every couple of weeks or every month, but it's really good if you're interested in more work and culture in a bigger way than probably just careers that we focus on. And he was sharing an article about everybody assumes that you collaborate better in person, but I think there's some evidence that contradicts that, or there's only certain types of collaboration that actually do work better in person. Ellen's gearing up for more time in the office. And you do want to collaborate in person, great. Yeah, it's quite strange. Someone else was talking to me about this actually, who works in Berlin this week, saying the thing that they miss the most is not really working in the office, it's socializing. People feeling confident they're going to get to that balance, which is great. Joe's field-based, so yeah, very used to being kind of out and about. Most people talking about 80, this that kind of 80-20 rule. Yeah, so Steve going, it's 3,000 miles to your head office. Yeah, fair enough. That's a very good practical point. Bruce Daisley, sorry. Oh, thanks, Sarah. We'll put the link to his newsletter. If Sarah can find it quickly, we'll put that in the chat, or if not, we'll put it in the Pod Plus. I'm trying to think what the name of his newsletter is. I think it's something like Better Work, but we'll find it for you all. So it's a really good thought leadership newsletter, and he's good actually on things like hybrid work. So what I wanted to think about now was just moving away from the where of hybrid work. I think a lot of the focus has been on, inevitably, because it's a big part of our lives, like where we spend our time. The bit I'm really interested in actually is how does hybrid work in reality? So for those of you here at the start, I asked Helen to ask Thomas a question that either didn't make the edit or she didn't bother to ask him because it didn't fit in with her, what she kind of got in mind. The thing that I'm really interested in, and let me know in chat if you've seen this work really well in your organization, perhaps pre-COVID, are things like, how do we have really effective meetings where we've got some people at home and some people in an office? And if you've got some people in a room together, how do you end up making sure that the people who are at home don't feel excluded? Because it feels a bit bizarre to then say to people who are in the office, well, you must go and sit at your desks by yourself because you're in the office. Of course, why would you not then go into a room together? But then if I'm dialing in from home and I can see people making eye contact, and then you might even forget that I'm there, like, how has anybody seen any interesting either technologies or ways of working that kind of really helps to facilitate everybody feeling involved and as included, and that sense of belonging that we would be looking for? So those are the things that I'm really interested in, because I think we will end up with, in most organizations, quite a hybrid way of working. And if we do go more personalized, how do those very practical things happen? How do we make sure people are included in things like socializing? How do you make sure, if you're more introverted, like I am, and get nervous meeting new people, how can I still create those connections? That's definitely something I've had to almost redefine and rework on through COVID. I'd managed to work out how to create connections for my career as an introvert, and actually doing that remotely, I found much harder. So actually other people saying it's a concern. I might even open this out to a broader community and see what ideas people have got. Because especially if this group feels like it's a challenge, actually we do need to really think about. That's interesting, James. Yeah, who's chairing a meeting? Hands up function is great. Yeah. Regular team meetings. Okay, yeah, that's nice, Tanya. So a bit of consistency in terms of going in person every 2 or 3 months, regular weekly team meets, and that is using the tech. Really interesting. I know it's maybe a bit practically boring, but I do think it's interesting. And then just 3 almost provocations that I wanted to leave this group with, because my sense is that you will all be early adopters in terms of hybrid. You'll be enthusiastic and interested in this area. So I was thinking, well, what could this group continue to do within your organizations, perhaps beyond also what you want to do for yourself? And the first point, and it sounds like some of you are already doing this really well already, but how can we create an ongoing culture of listening to people? Because I think this idea of kind of really involving everyone in co-creating, in designing hybrid work is a really big opportunity. And I can imagine within lots of organizations today, they are here, hopefully we are listening to people in terms of what works, getting people's input, but then it will be really easy for that to drop off again once maybe we get to September or towards the end of the year. So how can we create an ongoing culture, use this opportunity to create more of a culture of listening and involving everybody in designing how we work together, rather than it feeling like this is the job of the board or the job of leaders to design this or to create this. So what might that look like? I think that could be an interesting question to ask. The next thing is thinking a little bit about, as we talked about, not just the where, but how can we kind of transition the conversations to be much more about the how? And this is where I think this idea of experimenting, I always think of little Bunsen burners when I think of experimenting, but how can we start experimenting with different hows? So exactly like some of the ideas that I can see are coming through in chat, like what could we do to create a community, or maybe be really transparent about, as we're going into a hybrid world of work, what's everybody trying out, what's working, what's not, see it as a kind of real, it will benefit everybody and every organization if we can kind of learn together, rather than just feeling like we need to learn in isolation in our own organizations. Even seeing some of the examples that you're all sharing today are brilliant, great things to learn from. And as I sort of talked about, last thing, because I appreciate we're a tiny bit over time, but for all of you, how can you use your curiosity, the fact that you are here on a Thursday morning thinking about this, and you're reading, watching, listening to different things, how can you use that to benefit your organization? So some people are already talking about sharing the podcast, perhaps internally, perhaps sharing that McKinsey article, think about some of the things that Bruce has shared that perhaps might be really helpful. So this for me is you thinking about your role beyond the job that you do and thinking more about the organization that you are part of and your ability to have a positive influence and impact on the operating model of your organization or your department as a whole, thinking a bit beyond perhaps kind of just your world into kind of the bigger world of your organization, but also how can we all help each other? Because I love things like that virtual buddy idea and those things that we're seeing. And like I say, I don't think anybody has the answers. So can we try and improve and learn together? Slightly more provocations to finish today's session. So thank you so much for joining. I hope that's been really helpful. You can probably tell that it's me running it rather than Helen this week, because I was like, here's some provocations rather than here's a matrix of a 2x2. Don't worry, we will both be back in action, I think, together, Sarah, next week. Yeah, she's nodding along. So you'll get better both worlds next week. But I'm glad it was still broadly practical, Melissa. That's great. Hope that's been really helpful. Always let us know ideas for improvement, topics, other things you'd like us to be covering, but really appreciate your time this Thursday morning, if it is morning for you. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Really good to spend time with you all as always. Bye.